Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. You are on the Steady Coach, and I have a real treat for you today in this interview with Lorraine Faehndrich. Lorraine is a national board certified health and wellness coach who specializes in helping women who are going through hormonal transitions, in particular the menopause transition, and who are also experiencing medically unexplained chronic symptoms, in particular, in her case, chronic pain. In this interview, Lorraine and I take a deep dive into our experiences with women who are going through hormonal transitions and their susceptibility to medically unexplained chronic physical symptoms. While this conversation is certainly applicable to dizziness, and we talk about dizziness a lot in this conversation, Lorraine's specialty is in working with sexual health and pelvic pain. So if you're used to listening to my content with kids nearby, you may want to put on headphones for this one. This is such a far-reaching conversation, and I think you're going to learn a lot from it. It is so important we have this conversation. In the vestibular world, we are very well aware that women are more likely than men to have vestibular disorders and chronic dizziness symptoms. And we also know that hormonal transitions, including postpartum times, perimenopause, and menopause, are times when women are most vulnerable to vestibular disorders. It is my greatest wish that when the mainstream starts talking about this and acknowledging the role that hormonal transitions are playing in people's vulnerability to symptoms, that we take a wide lens biopsychosocial approach to the symptoms women are having and not look at you as just a collection of hormones and hormonal changes. If you want to learn more about Lorraine and her amazing work with pelvic pain, you can visit her on her website via the links that I will place in the video description or podcast description. Thank you so much for watching. And if you have questions or comments, as always, please drop them below if you are on YouTube. If you're listening to this as a podcast, head on over to YouTube to join the conversation. And you can all please like, share, subscribe to my channel, follow the podcast, leave my podcast a high star rating. All of these things help me reach more people with important conversations like this one. All right, please enjoy this conversation with Lorraine Faehndrich. Lorraine, it is so great to see you again and so happy that you are here on my channel for an interview now.
Oh, it's so great to be here, Yoni. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Yeah. We're going to be digging into some very interesting stuff. And honestly, stuff that I think people are just not talking about, especially in my field. I was just sharing with you off air, I suppose, that I just read a review article that was published just a few days ago about the connection between menopause and dizziness symptoms. And they basically distilled it all down to, oh, this is a biological hormonal problem. And I think that, not to say that we shouldn't be talking about hormonal things and hormonal transitions, but I think that is such a limited, narrow view. And I think you and I share that perspective so much. So we're going to dig into all that today. I was hoping, before I start asking all of my questions, could you just tell people a little bit about what you do and who you are?
Sure, yeah. My name's Lorraine Faehndrich, and I'm a pelvic health and pain relief coach. And I've been helping women relieve pelvic and sexual pain using a mind-body approach for 13 years. I teach a group program for women, and I offer coaching. And yeah, I really just focus on helping women address the mental and emotional and nervous system issues that are underlying chronic pain. So when I hear about that article, it's like no different than any other area of our medical approach, right? Like that's what it does. It looks for the physiological, biological causes of things without looking at the impact that our emotions and our life and how we relate to ourselves and everything else has on our physiology.
Speaking my language.
Yeah.
Speaking my language. Everyone who's watching this now is like, "Oh, I know why she's here on this channel. Okay, this all makes sense now." Yeah, totally. Okay, so in that case, let's just go for it. Let's just dive right in. So,
Okay.
why what's your opinion on why physical symptoms? So I know you work with chronic pain, I work with chronic dizziness, but we see a lot of this stuff show up during hormonal transitions, not just menopause, but also PMS, postpartum times, pregnancy. So why do you think some of these chronic symptoms show up during that time? Is it just a hormonal problem or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, right. I think there's more to it than that. And that's
That
not
was
to
a softball,
discount
right?
right, yeah, that's not to discount what's happening physiologically. I mean, especially during menopause or PMS, those are our body is going through cycles that and it is showing up physiologically, but I also think there's an emotional component to it. So if we're looking specifically at menopause, that's a time in a woman's life where there can be a lot of change happening. If they have children, their children are getting older, maybe leaving. If they may have aging parents that they're taking care of. But beyond that, just like the way I work with women is by helping them come back into their bodies, reclaim their emotional energy, learn how to allow that to kind of move through their bodies and be more connected to their intuition and um, looking at how they're thinking about things and how they're relating to their body and emotions. So with our menstrual cycle, like when we're menstruating, that would be a natural time of release, right? Like a natural and it can be an emotional time, and that's not necessarily a problem. But if we look at TMS or like John Sarno's work, and he talked about how the pain is a distraction from underlying things that are going on emotionally. And then we look at a time in a woman's life that is more emotional, and that's not recognized or honored by our culture at all.
Totally not. Yes.
So there's no space to allow that natural cycle or transition during menstruation. And then menopause is an even bigger change. It's a huge life change. Like, that women aren't supported with in this culture, that no one is really talking about other than in a super medical, biological way without considering all the other emotional and energetic components of menopause. So like in traditional Chinese medicine, menopause is considered the second spring. So it's a time when there's like a rebirth and there's this new energy that comes up for a woman to help them like create what they're going to create now in their life. It's like our, childbearing years have ended, and that's a big change that's happening. And then there's this new burst of energy coming forward, and most of that's just all getting suppressed and not acknowledged. And then on top of other emotional things happening in our life, that's impacting our nervous system, the level of tension in our body. And I think that that's, working with women who have, so during menopause, uh, pain during sex is the main symptom that I'm working with, and also urinary symptoms. Um, and yeah, so a lot of that can even have to do with how a woman feels about herself sexually and what's changing for them sexually and what they want now in their relationship or partnership. And that can also play a role.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the same applies for dizziness. Maybe, maybe some of what you've seen with your clients is going on, but it can just as easily affect someone's other senses. If the nervous system is on high alert because there's this tremendous change, a biological change, true, but it signifies something so much bigger than a biological change. And if a woman has been used to pushing through and ignoring her emotions all these years, the body's she's not going to be able to get away with it during a time of extra stress like menopause, whether you think of that kind of from a more biological perspective or not. um, I'm wondering, so as you were talking, I'm thinking about the people who are going to listen to this podcast, and I was thinking that, it's interesting, the pendulum seems to have just swung too far. So there was a time when women were told that menopause symptoms were all in their heads and PMS symptoms were all in their heads. Like, just get over it, take an ibuprofen, and just pretend it's not happening, right? And I think now the intention might be good. We're trying to acknowledge that there is something happening. There's no question something's happening, and that this does contribute to the development of pain and vestibular disorders. We know this. But all anyone's talking about are the biological mechanisms. It seems to me almost out of fear that we're going to accidentally make it seem like we're saying something's in someone's head. So,
Mm.
so how do you explain this to people who who understand and want to be acknowledged for the fact that their symptoms are real? These symptoms are real. They're not just, in their heads, or, just, oh, I'm making it up, or it's a psychological problem. How do you explain this to them?
Um, well, by telling them I understand that it's not in their head because because I've experienced it myself, like, and also the pain science, neuroscience points to the fact that all pain is created in our brain. So really it's all in our head.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not real physical pain, right? It's being created by the nervous system. It's not necessarily about what's happening physiologically in our tissues. They're two independent things. They can impact each other, but not necessarily. And the first thing that comes to me when you ask that is like, well, it wasn't that long ago that we were completely ignoring the impact of nutrition and diet on what was happening in our body. And the mental and emotional and nervous system component of what's happening physiologically in our body is no different than that, right? Like, it is legitimately an actual part of our health and what affects our body. And there's tons of research now
So
that
much.
supports that.
So much
Right.
research.
So to ignore it and only go down the medical path, which in itself can just create more stress and fear and tension and disconnection from our body, because we're only looking outside of ourselves for what is wrong. And we get disconnected from our own agency, from our own intuition. And that just feeds and perpetuates this nervous system activation that's underlying a lot of pain, and I'm sure dizziness and the symptoms you're working with.
Absolutely. Beautifully stated. And just highlighting here for people who are listening, there is legitimate high quality research, and a lot of it showing this, that you are not just a biological organism. So your psychology, and when I say psychology, we're not talking about, oh, like, I have anxiety. We're talking about your past stress and what experiences you've had, your beliefs about yourself, the way that you relate to yourself and other people, and then your social circumstances. So are you supported by people around you? Are you feeling really lonely? What's your socioeconomic status? What kind of job do you have? Like, all these things affect your biology on a, like, again, on a biological level. So to ignore those things, as you said, is just so, it's just doing such a disservice to people going through
Yeah,
symptoms, but especially in our work, because I see so many women who have symptoms show up right around the time of perimenopause. It's doing an incredible disservice to women, especially, I think.
I 100% agree. And something you said earlier before, like, it's like we just can't get away with it anymore. Like, I think women historically we're we have all these roles we're supposed to fit into in society. We're taught to take care of other people. So a lot of women, by the time they're hitting perimenopause, are taking care of children, holding down a job, taking care of partners, taking care of parents. Like, they're not making time for themselves. They're pushing themselves in so many ways. And then we come into this big life change that on its own requires energy and our inner focus and our self-care and space for ourselves. And it's just like the tipping point that
Yeah.
sets off symptoms, but the pattern was there all along. We're just getting to a point where our body's like, nope, we're not doing that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you, Lorraine. And I'm just, again, it's just such a treat for me to get to talk to someone like you
Me too.
who's on the same page.
Yes. Yeah.
So, okay. So let's, I know that you and I tend to see different symptoms. Obviously, you're focusing more on intimate and pelvic pain. I'm focused more on dizziness. I'm curious to know, and I'm sure others would be interested in hearing this as well. What in general are women being told about their symptoms by their healthcare providers?
Well, I think that the basic, I mean, when it comes to menopause, so what are with pain during sex, which is the main pain during sex and urinary things, bladder infections, increased bladder infections, UTIs, they're being told it's because of hormonal changes or hormones out of balance.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
then doctors are recommending hormone replacement therapy. Sometimes that's like creams, topical stuff for the vagina, and sometimes that's other forms of taking hormones.
mhm. Okay.
That's what they're
That's
hearing.
it.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's pretty
Okay.
much it. Yeah.
It, I feel like on one hand, I'm like, wow, that's kind of even better than, I mean, as dismal as that is, because of course that's just looking so in it's such a narrowly focused way. By the way, guys, I'm not anti-HRT. I just want to put that out there right now. I don't think Lorraine, or
No.
either Lorraine or I are anti-hormone replacement therapy. We just like anything else, you're a whole person. You're not just a bunch of estrogen. So like looking at you like you're a bunch of estrogen or an estrogen receptacle is just not okay to, I think, to both of us.
Yes.
But my clients aren't even being told that there's any relationship at all with menopause. They're just told, yeah, more women get this than men. There's no treatment. So here's some migraine meds. Good luck. And anti-anxiety meds. Oh, so they're either told it's in your head, it's anxiety. Here's an anxiety medication, or they're told, oh, there's something horribly wrong with you. This is genetic, and menopause, or just you because you're broken as a person. You're just, you got bad genetics. So like, yeah, this is just going to be a lifelong thing. But they're not even given the information that hormonal fluctuations can absolutely play a role here. So on one hand, I appreciate the fact that some of your clients are actually being told, okay, hormones may be playing a role here. But on the other hand, that just sends them, I'm sure, further down the medical rabbit hole.
Yes, it does. And also, I guess, that's the main additional thing they're being told during perimenopause and menopause. There's also pelvic floor dysfunction, which is they're being told it's because the muscles in their pelvic floor are tense, and not that that can't play a role, but that tension also can be caused by emotional factors. Um, yeah, I mean, with pain during sex, there that I have had so many, like, you wouldn't believe how many clients have been told, just like literally drink a glass of wine and have sex with your husband because you owe him sex. Or there's
Wow.
nothing there, yeah, or there is nothing wrong with you. Um, it's all in your head for sure. And so maybe it is a progress for them to being told during menopause there's something physiological going on. And also, if they're only looking at that, then it's taking them down this rabbit hole of there's all these different hormones we can try in different ways. Like I have a client right now who is on her third or fourth cream that she's trying topically, at hormonal cream, and everyone will work for a little while and then start causing more irritation and more redness. And I'm not saying that's everyone's experience. For some people, it totally may be the thing. But for a lot of women, it's not. And it keeps them sucked into this. There is something wrong with my body. And now because it's menopause, this is the way it's going to be forever because it taps into like, oh, I'm aging and my like the names, like they're told like right because of decreased estrogen, there's thinning tissues, vaginal atrophy. I mean, can we think of a scarier thing to
Right.
call it?
Right. Right.
Like your vagina is never going to be the same again, and like that's all really scary stuff to hear, and it's upsetting because I also see lots of women in menopause who aren't having pain or who relieve pain using a mind body approach without using any
Right.
estrogen or hormone support. So your vagina can absolutely still be healthy and it can even come back from thinning tissues. And yeah, and just because we have physiological changes doesn't necessarily mean we should have pain, as you know,
Or other symptoms.
right? Because the
Yes.
pain is coming from the brain and nervous system, not
That's right.
necessarily from physiological changes. So even if there is some tissue thinning or inflammation or other changes that are physiological, that doesn't necessarily mean there should be discomfort as well.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So, thinking kind of on the parallel here for dizziness. So this review article again has some interesting things in it, and one of the things that said, and I've read elsewhere too, is that we do know there's no question that estrogen plays a role in modulating different functions of our brain, but that is a that's a big stretch to then just say, oh, estrogen's the problem. Estrogen is the only problem. And when we talk about like a complex system of modulation, coming back to what we were saying earlier, that all this research shows in the field, Lorraine, I know you know that this is what the field is called. It's psychoneuroimmunology. Um, there's so much research in that field that shows that all these other factors have very complex effects on our endocrine and our nervous system. So again, to think of it as just a one-dimensional estrogen problem is really is what I find problematic. And again, as you say, maybe again, it's good to acknowledge we have some kind of physiologic change going on here, but that doesn't necessarily explain chronic symptoms. It may explain what I like to think of as vulnerability to chronic symptoms, like vulnerability to a particular symptom showing up. And I remember, Lorraine, when we spoke last time, I talked about my stress bucket metaphor, how we have all these various things in our lives that affect our capacity to deal with stress. And when you're going through a big hormonal transition, your stress bucket is just kind of dealing with a lot right now. There's just a lot. And then, as you said, caring for aging parents, caring for partners, dealing with houses, goodness knows what other things you're responsible for in your life. Your bucket is totally full. So is it really any surprise that when you develop a little bit of a vulnerability to something happening, maybe the physiological change is producing maybe just a little vulnerability to something, you would end up with that problem. And that's how I think of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess that brings us to like, what do we do about this? So what do we do about this? Oh my gosh, I mean, it just feels like a mountain when people are being told something so contradictory to the way that you and I think about this.
Yeah. I mean, so, when women come to work with me, obviously they're on board, they're resonating with the fact that there's something maybe emotional or stress related that's going on in their life. And I think that, um, with all mind body symptoms or mind body pain, there can be physiological components. And I think that maybe in the areas we're working, like pelvic pain, or especially during menopause, when there are hormones and other physiological things happening, I think it's important for women to be able to navigate all of that by learning how to trust themselves. So, obviously, in addition to anything I would do with someone who was having chronic pelvic pain at any stage in their life, which would be learning how to come back into their body, feel emotions and the felt sense in their body, learn how to access their intuition, how to make space for themselves in their lives, how to take pressure off themselves, which a lot of that is mental, like a lot of perfectionism, a lot of self-criticism, a lot of patterns of worry. Like, so learning how to work with the mental and emotional pieces, but then also in addition to that, learning how to trust themselves around everything in their life, but in particular around navigating the sea of options available for treating pelvic pain, pain during sex, and not only medical. There's also a lot of alternative treatments to look at, right? Like, so we have acupuncturists and naturopaths and medical doctors and diet changes, and when we're only in this approach of finding something outside of us to fix us without looking at what feels right to me, what does my body resonate with doing, um, then we can end up just in this never ending cycle of trying thing after thing after thing, and that that just creates more stress and more symptoms. So yeah, so I think the main thing is learning how to come back into your body, learning how to trust yourself, learning how, like, that you, no matter what expert you're working with, ultimately you are the expert on you. And ideally you have practitioners who honor that and who know that and who understand the mind body components of pelvic health and pain relief and value your input into the decision making process.
Mm. Okay, so much to unpack from what you just said. Can Would it be all right? You're such a great communicator, so with your permission, I wanna get really specific about a few things that you said.
Sure.
Could we
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, felt sense. So, 2 things about that. First, people's bodies can be very uncomfortable places to be when they're dealing with a lot of symptoms. So, first, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how to help someone develop a felt sense when they're like, my body sucks right now. It just really sucks to be
Mm.
here. But the second thing is, okay, hear me out. This is something I've been thinking a lot about myself because what really confuses people is finding the balance between checking in with their intuition and felt sense and like constantly monitoring themselves like in an anxious and obsessive way or in a like overwhelming way. So I'd love to know you may be answering both of these questions at once, but I'd love to know how you help people navigate those things.
Great questions. Okay, so well, I think first to the point of my body is an overwhelming, uncomfortable place. Why would I want to feel more what's happening in my body?
Yes.
Well, first, first we work on some mindset stuff around decreasing fear around the symptoms themselves. But then I think it's important to recognize that a lot is happening in your body besides only the symptoms. And also that, as you know, with these patterns, the focus on the symptoms is part of what is preventing our awareness of our
Other
emotional
stuff.
experience and other things that are happening in our body. So really, I mean, I body scans, but with the approach of welcoming and not trying to change anything. So, okay, I'm having pain or burning, and I'm going to just practice letting that be here for right now. It's uncomfortable. I don't like it here, but for now it's not dangerous. And then continuing to scan what else is happening in my body. Where is there tension? Where is there uh pleasant sensations, openness,
Or
because
even
just
neutrality.
or neutrality, comfort,
Yeah, we'll go with that too.
neutrality. I think a lot of women also can get into or people in general, but get into like, I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything else. And that's really the impact of like, well, we've been so disconnected from our body for so long. Now our body is screaming at us with pain. That's the only thing we can notice. And so it is just practice. I just watched, there's a show on Netflix right now. It's about gut health, but there's a person in the movie who is a competitive eater. And so for years and years of forcing food in he no longer had the sensation of fullness or hunger, gone, like nothing. So they scanned his brain, and what they found is all of those areas of his brain are not off, they are fully activated, but he can't perceive the sensations anymore. And the process they were using was take one food at a time, smell it, look at it, leave it in your. So basically, slow down enough that you can start hooking up this connection again so you can feel the signals that your brain and nervous system are actually sending. So I think if we go through our whole lives suppressing our emotional energy so that we can get A's in school, because it's hard to sit still in school if you are young, like that's just unnatural, making children sit still in school all day, right? Or meeting the expectations of the people around us, whether that's parents, whether that's in school, whether that's because we were in traumatic experiences where we just couldn't, it would have been way too overwhelming to welcome our emotional experience. So I think a similar thing is happening around emotions. Our brain stops telling us they're there. And so, and then when we lose that sensation in our body, we lose access to this amazing, incredible system we have for knowing what's right for us and what's not, and having intuition and feeling safer and more confident in the world. So really, body scans, education about that, and just slowly creating safety and building up the ability to move your attention off of only the uncomfortable sensations to everything else that's in your body.
Mhm. And I'm just gonna endorse this for dizziness as well. So everyone listening, I know you're hearing Lorraine use words related to pain and burning. Absolutely no different in this case in terms of what you can try for dizziness. So just wanted to say that in case anyone was wondering.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Also, it's really great for me to hear too, because a lot of women in menopause are also having dizziness and yeah,
Yes. Oh, yeah, I'm sure they
having pelvic
absolutely
pain.
are.
Yeah,
Yes, yes,
right.
yeah, yeah.
And then the constant monitoring. I mean, yeah. So I tell them one mind body practice a day, no more than 45 minutes. Of course, that's not going to happen. And of course, over time, it's going to naturally be that you're aware more, like you're going to
Mhm,
notice more. But I think that comes from that. A lot of women who end up with mind body symptoms have patterns of perfectionism and achieving, and then they take that approach and they apply it to trying to heal, and it backfires because it's just filled with stress and pressure and hyper focus. And yeah, so
mhm.
I suggest
Limit.
on how much you're practicing.
Yes. Okay. And
I'm curious what
again, I
you
told you
do.
what's that? What I
I'm
do?
curious how you do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so first of all, of course, I I'll start with the practical stuff first. So with like habits. Like we start by building small habits and we limit the amount of time we're spending on things. We try to use a light touch and I explain what that means. People have trouble with that. Um, what I run into though is that a subset, maybe a very big subset of my clients are highly sensitive people too. And so they naturally have just really big feelings and a propensity for feeling overwhelmed by their feelings, and they have spent their entire lives running away from them.
Mhm.
And so it's not, I think that one of the most important messages that I give people is that you are skill building, you are not solving right now. You are skill building. So we are not, you're not trying to feel an emotion to completion. I know a lot of mind body practitioners talk about this stuff like processing trauma and processing emotions to completion. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do those things. ultimately, but that's not your job right now. Your job is to build skills of awareness and allowing and relating to. Period. That's the first step. And I think when I explain that we're skill building and that we don't have a specific objective of like getting to a certain point emotionally or getting to a certain point in terms of uh, what happens to the symptoms. I mean, this is essentially outcome independence, I suppose. That really seems to help.
Yes, I totally agree, and I also do that skill. I also actually, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Karate Kid.
Of
Um,
course. Oh,
right. So
yes.
I actually use that
Oh, I love
example,
that.
like,
I haven't used that. I'm so excited.
right? Like,
Yes.
here he is wanting to learn how to fight, and instead he's painting the fence and sand, wax on, wax off, waxing the cars,
Yes. Painting.
sanding the deck,
Yes.
painting, whatever. All
Yes.
those are the skills. Like he was teaching his
Yes.
brain and body how to do those things so that those skills could come together in the end to
Yes.
help him fight. It's
Ye-
very much the same. So you're building the skill of working with your mind and decreasing stressful thinking. You're building the skill of staying present with sensations, present with emotional energy. I 100% agree. We're not trying to get emotions out of our body. We're building
Right.
our ability to feel them and hold them in our body. And
Right. And
yes,
understand them. And then maybe say, cool, I got the signal. I may still just be acknowledging and honoring this emotion while I'm not listening to this emotion, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on. But we 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 are not able to fully access our needs unless we have access to the data. And we need the data. And if you are not accessing the data, you have no idea what you need. So,
yeah,
yeah.
100%. Oh,
Yeah.
and I also think that like I also have clients who are more on the very emotional side of things, like, or they feel like they're too emotional because their emotions feel overwhelming to them. But even
Sure.
with those women, sometimes there's an initial, like, they're in touch with like the big heaviness or the big sensations, but when they go deeper, they don't feel anything else. Like, so yeah, and I mean, I think in our culture, those are reflections of the same coin because if you can't be with your emotions, the two options are like dump them out, which is someone who might think of themselves as really emotional, or suppress them, which is someone who may be more like, I'm fine, everything's great, and now I have pain. Yeah.
Right. Right. And we talk a lot about the suppressors and not so much about the ones who feel like initially emotional.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up because I was thinking about this as you were talking just a few moments ago. I have a subset of folks also who say, I feel super angry and emotional and sad and full of, grief over this thing. And I'm crying for hours at a time over this thing. I don't know that that's really feeling your emotions either. I hate to say it that way. And this is not accusatory. I think of that as a defense as well. I think of that as a strategy for dealing with emotions. I'm just wondering what your take is on that.
Yeah, so I actually do a lot of I think of emotions as there's a mental part of them and a body part of them. And
Mhm.
that usually when things are overwhelming like that, it's because of the mental part, not the in the body energy sensation felt sense part. Although if we have a lot of scary thinking, like so if we're stuck in thoughts of being angry that this is happening, it shouldn't be happening, or self-judgment, worry, doubt, catastrophizing, that is going to make bigger sensations in our body. Um, and I mean, I perceive that as like if you then there's the emotional energy part of sensation in our body, minus the mental component that is usually not overwhelming. That's usually more subtle. Um, I compare emotions to like water, like their energy flowing through your body. And that when we go into our head with all these scary thoughts, it kind of blocks the flow. And if you think of like a dam in a river, the point where the water is blocked, there's going to be more sensation. So it's actually the resistance of the emotion or the going into our head and not so a defense mechanism, yes, exactly what you said. That makes
Mhm.
it feel bigger.
Right. It's the
Yeah,
story. It's the story. I've started using that
Story.
term. It's the
Yes, it's
story.
the story.
Yeah. And kind of bringing me to another skill that I think you're getting at when you're talking about felt sense. It's also present moment awareness. And I'm sorry to use such a, if anyone's listening to this and is like, oh, she's going, Eastern philosophy on us. I'm sorry. But really, present moment awareness, that is actually a really important skill, because if you are in the future or the past and you're full of like all sorts of stories about how awful it's going to be, that's going to, just like you said, it's going to block the flow. It's going to prevent you from actually getting the data that you need in order to meet your own needs. It's also going to amplify everything times 100 or times 1,000. And you're going to end up just totally overwhelmed and unable to work through anything, or totally numb because you got so overwhelmed, you exceeded your capacity at the moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. So bringing us back to felt sense. So that sounds like something very, very important that you work on. So what then? Like, so are we building on that skill in some way, or is that just a fundamental skill and then you move on to others? So how does that help people who are dealing with chronic symptoms?
Oh, yeah. I love this discussion.
I know, this is so fun. I know. I was just thinking, I hope other people enjoy this conversation as much as I'm enjoying it, because this is great.
Yeah. Um, okay, so as we've already touched on, that is information. That felt sense is where we can get our guidance about what's right for us and what's not right for us, and even much more specific information than that. Like, and then I mean, I often say, like, it makes so much sense that we would be born into this body and have this system that when something feels good, it is good, and when something doesn't feel good, it isn't good for us. Like, that's just logical, but it's so much suppression, so much trying to fit into what people are telling us is right for us, or what we have to do to get by, that all that gets suppressed and very confused. And once we start to get access to it again, I think it's much starts to get much clearer about what's a yes and what's a no. So then the next step is maybe starting to make the changes in your life that are going to line up with what's a yes and what's a no. And I think a simple way to do that is what feels good. And I mean, I have a big part of my programs are starting to notice pleasure again in your body, not just sexual and sensual pleasure, which is obviously important and connected with pelvic pain, but also just sitting in the sun, learning how to connect to your body in ways that feel good, being gentle with yourself, like doing more things in your life that feel good, and allowing yourself to feel the felt sense of that in your body as well. Because when we lose access to our felt sense, we don't only lose things that we might call not desirable, like anger or fear, but we also lose what feels like a yes, what feels good, what feels like pleasure, what feels like joy. Um, and then, and then for pelvic pain, a big focus is reconnecting in a loving way with your sexuality, with your vulva and vagina, because if you didn't have stress or shame or fear connected to that part of your body before you had pelvic pain, which a lot of women do, then after going through a bunch of treatments and everything else that women go through to get a diagnosis and try and get better, there's usually disconnection.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
And dizziness too. Now, dizziness, I think, would be more general, but people develop these
yeah,
incredibly hostile relationships with their bodies. I mean, I think previously they were just, it wasn't really that great of a relationship before all the dizziness started, but then the dizziness starts and they feel betrayed. They feel completely betrayed and let down by their bodies. They are they view everything that is going on as a sign of how dysfunctional and broken their bodies are. So I think, again, all mind body treatments involve some exposure and some movement. I'm aware of that, but I think especially for dizziness, that needs to be the case, because you you again, as you say, you need to start connecting movement and your sense of your body with something that you you value and love in some way, even if it's doing something you don't really like. It's kind of like, I mean, Lorraine, I'm in a phase in my life where I have young kids. So I always think of things in terms of my kids. I'm not going to be like, you know what, you're doing something I don't like right now. So that's it. You're, you're just obviously defective. I'm writing you off. Like, of course you wouldn't do that with your
Right.
kids. Why do we do it with our bodies? I don't understand
Yeah.
that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And move I don't I do recommend like because with pelvic pain and going for physical therapy and doing exercises to try and rebalance the muscle,
Yeah.
like right?
Oh, yeah.
I will,
Topless.
we're
Yeah.
still relating to our bodies and movement in a very prescriptive way to try and also to try and fix something that's wrong. And so I'm encouraging like connect to your body and how does it want to move and move for pleasure and what feels good and yeah and like an underlying like there's not something broken here, like there's not something broken, there may be something out of balance there, but underneath there's still this wholeness and wellness and starting to tap back into that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, first of all, big parallel here with vestibular therapy. So, your folks are going through pelvic floor therapy. My folks are going through vestibular therapy. And again, it's very prescriptive, very much like I need to fix this problem because my ears and my brain are just not working right. Okay. But now I have a bit of a challenge question for you, one that I think is an interesting one to answer. So, what about the fact that right now your body is sending a signal that you kind of need to not believe. So we often tell people we want you to listen to your body and really listen in. But right now your body's giving you messages that you sort of also need to relate to in a different way, like not necessarily. So okay, with dizziness, every time I go into a grocery store, my vision goes crazy and I feel like I'm going to fall over. Okay. So does that mean if I'm honoring and listening to my body that I shouldn't go to a grocery store, or I should believe it when it says that I'm going to fall over? So how do you relate to those kind of
Right.
overly sensitive or
Well,
signals?
so when it comes to pain, it depends on what we're looking at, right? Like if we're looking at walking, then then recognizing uh, I still I can still incorporate, I think, a listen to your body approach. And I actually think with anything related to sex, that's hugely important because there's just a lot of miseducation. Like, so a big part of my program is re-educating women about their arousal anatomy and just their arousal in general and pleasure. And because as women, we've been fed this model of what sex is supposed to be that isn't optimal for our bodies. There's a lot of shame and disconnection. And so a lot of women are having sex for their partner or it's just not optimal for them, like, and they're not communicating about that. So I think tuning in a little more deeply in those cases is really important and not pushing past symptoms, but also not letting symptoms be like a big red stop sign and don't go, but more like an opportunity to tune in and get more
Check.
curious, like
Mhm.
what's actually going on emotionally for me right now. And, the vagina in particular is very receptive in the moment. Like, if we're like, it's a place in our body that's going to guard and protect emotionally, maybe before other parts of our body. So, if we're not feeling safe, if we're not feeling creating safety for ourselves by being willing to speak up or staying connected to our body, we can get contraction and tension and discomfort. So instead of being like, well, I can't have sex because it's uncomfortable, I'll say, well, first start with connecting and pleasure. So I recommend a self pleasure practice, learning how to connect to your whole body and start reconnecting to your vulva and vagina and your sexual energy in like slow, safe ways. Like find what feels good and follow that pleasure. And when you bump up against things that don't feel good, is it just because there's a way that you're holding and contracting? Is it because your brain's perceiving something's not safe right now? And how can you bring more safety into the situation? So Um,
Right. And
yeah,
I guess the corollary there would be with our grocery store example, not to I
yeah.
know that's how do these things relate, Oneat?
Oh, they
No,
totally relate.
totally, they do, because how are we grocery shopping? No, honestly, uh, uh, not to say that it feels good to be dizzy when you go into the grocery store, or that you have a deeply repressed emotion that comes up only when you're grocery shopping. It's the expectations in general and the way we live our lives that is going to impact you in those situations where symptoms are more likely to occur, as well as other situations. And I don't know about you, Lorraine, but if you're working with some of the people that I'm working with, these are folks who their minds are constantly going in 20 different directions. They're constantly thinking and worrying about all the other things they need to do. They're probably not grocery shopping like in a leisurely way, in a way that is enjoyable. They're not necessarily focused on the sensation or smelling the freshly baked bread. This is a like, okay, I need to get in because I've got to feed the family, because if I don't do this, like it's got to be me. There's all this pressure and stress that goes in. Again, I'm not saying that's the cause of symptoms, but what I'm saying is we need to consider these things when we say push through, and maybe like say to yourself, okay, I'm actually safe. This is a nervous system error. Is it really a nervous system error if your body is pushing back on you because you're incredibly stressed out and living like 5 years from now and worrying about everything and like not at all in your body in that moment? So I think just honestly answering that question, is this a nervous system error right now? Like that should be a question people ask themselves, whether they're grocery shopping or
Oh, I
having
love that. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Am I connected to my body right now, or is this not yeah, right. Totally. Is this a nervous system error? That's a really great question.
I just came up with it
Yeah.
right now. There's a synergy happening here, Lorraine.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but
And actually,
yeah,
surprisingly, the grocery store connection and sex have a lot in common.
they do have a lot in common. Who knew? I feel like that's going to be the title of this interview. What do
I
grocery
mean
stores and sex have in common?
yeah, I mean, like, I remember a point in time where I was just focusing on being more present in my life in general, and shopping was a place where I was like, "Okay, what's next on the list?" And I
Yes,
made a conscious decision to start going in and, like, appreciating the abundance that was surrounding me and let myself feel the experience of being in the grocery store and
yes,
being able to choose foods, and, like, it became a pleasurable experience. Like, I
exactly,
yes. I do think pleasure can
exactly.
be something that is super informative.
And Lorraine, I am so glad you're bringing this up, because you and I are coaches. We're not psychotherapists. You and I have a lot of training in a lot of psychotherapy related things, but neither of us are psychotherapists. We don't think like psychotherapists. I feel like in the mind body world, sometimes there's a focus on what's wrong rather than what we should be pursuing instead. Like, oh, you've got emotions, you got to learn how to feel emotions, and it's just a nervous system error, and we got to work on managing your thoughts. All true, good, like these are things we should work on. But what you're saying is something that's just it's it's making me happy, because I think it's just as important for people to find I talk about values a lot, but their values, their sources of joy, their sources of meaning, because when you find those things, you become so much bigger than your symptoms. And it's so much easier to implement some of the other stuff that we talk about, like, oh, try to like kind of know this is going to be, it's going to take what it takes, and try to be outcome independent, try not to focus too much on the symptoms. It's really hard to do that if you think of yourself as a symptom. But if you think of yourself as a person who has other experiences, and you have felt experience with joy, with pleasure, with pursuing your values, with meaning, with feeling like you're a contributor, whatever it is that's important to you, the symptoms just become less relevant. And again, not to say that we should just ignore them and say, well, now you have to live with them, but that's actually part of this healing process.
100%. I mean, I I really think that it's great to have all the science and everything that explains this, but I was a coach before I had pelvic pain, and
Mhm.
I healed my pain without knowing anything about any of the TMS or mind body stuff. I was so excited to find it because it validated what I had
Mhm.
done. But my approach, for a long time, in my late 20s, I was a CPA working at a big accounting firm, and I was having anxiety and migraines and all of these health things. I was miserable, and I decided to quit and started exploring taking psychology and art classes and doing yoga. And within months, my symptoms were gone. And so that was hugely informative to me. And I kind of made this decision at that point in my life that doing things the way I was supposed to do them was not working. And instead of following my mind, I was going to follow my heart. And really my whole life I've been doing this, which is how I ended up becoming a coach. A quote that really means a lot to me is Joseph Campbell's quote, "Follow your bliss and the universe will open doors where there were only walls." And
Oh.
none of people, we're not living that way.
Mm-mm.
And so we're really disconnected from the essence of who we are, the joy of who we are, the bigness of who we are. We're squashing ourselves into these boxes and putting all this pressure on ourselves to do things right. And I just think that if we wanted to make this simple, if we started looking at what actually feels good to us in our body, what's our soul calling us to, what really brings us joy, what are our values, and start moving towards those things, that's incredibly healing. And, when people talk about, well, your body talks in whispers first and then it screams, whispers and the screams are, to me, are get back on track. You're out of alignment with who you really are and what your truth is and why you're here and what you really want to do. Start living again and not just working and pushing. And yeah, so I go this my one of my favorite topics. I think that's the bigger underlying
I
thing. I
agree.
think people get confused when they hear follow pleasure because they think of pleasures that are addictive things like sugar. Well, then I'll just eat a bunch of sugar, or I'll be lazy, or those are the kinds of pleasure that we go to when we're dissociated, when we're not feeling what's happening in our
Yeah.
body.
They're also defense mechanisms.
And
They're ways not to feel. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I think pleasure is an interesting word because, as you say, it has this implication of just hedonism.
Yeah.
But I think what, like, at a deeper level, maybe this is a bit philosophical for this conversation, but not for you and I. Obviously, we're already there. Um, it seems to me that deep, true pleasure is not a one-dimensional, this only feels good, but rather this feels deeply meaningful and I'm part of something bigger. I'm bigger than I am. And it can have components of discomfort in it. It doesn't necessarily need to just feel good. This is just a good feeling, but rather, I guess, meaningful is the word that I
Mm,
would use.
yeah.
Um, okay, so I'd love to bring it all together for folks listening. I could go on this line of talking for a while, but now that we're here, I actually think this would be so useful. Can you help us understand what this looks like for someone going through a menopause transition or who's struggling with symptoms during PMS? So they've worked on some skills around getting a felt sense. They've started, as we've been talking about in the last few minutes, really getting a sense of what feels good. So, what does this end up looking like in their lives? What changes?
Mm. Wow. So many and so individual, but overall, just listening to themselves more, starting to carve more time out for themselves, looking at their list of have tos and recognizing that they don't have to do all the have tos
Mhm.
and that they can really, I like to think of for women especially, we're giving from an empty well, and to switch the model to filling ourselves up and giving from the overflow. And
Right.
so putting more of a focus on making sure the things that fill us up and make us feel happy and alive are a significant part of our day, just like eating healthy food would be, or and it doesn't have to be lots and lots of time, but that there are times where we're having time for our mind body practice, which for me is just a time where we're dropping out of our head, connecting to our felt sense, checking in and seeing what our bigger self, what our intuition is telling us for that day. So we go into our day or have some point in our day where we're connecting. And then starting to speak up more in relationships, in work, set boundaries. Like the world's not going to end if you stop doing this and this. Or for some people, it might be in menopause, especially. Like my children are gone. I'm at this whole new phase. Well, what does it? What do you want your life to be like now? What's
Mhm.
calling you? Where do you want to start looking forward? Because I think especially anything that has to do with aging, there can also be this mindset of like,
It's just getting worse.
it's
Yep.
getting worse. The joy part of my life is over. Like, instead of starting to like, what is that second spring for me? What is my second act going to be? Where am I going to go now? It's not like an ending, it's also a new beginning. And then I think, when it comes to pain during sex, like that can look like a lot of conversation and communication with a partner, developing your own self pleasure practice, learning more about your body, both by being with it and educating yourself about it, um, and exploring sexuality and sensuality in more creative ways, more playful, open ways with a partner.
Mhm. Yes. I'm struck by the fact that everything that you said now is great advice that our viewers probably already kind of know. And I kind of feel like as a coach, our job, we don't, it's not that we know anything like magical that we couldn't just tell you, like, do these things like right now. Like, we already know. I mean, we don't necessarily know exactly where you're going to end up, but it almost seems like the reason the felt sense and getting in tune with yourself and your values and your body is so important is because it 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 provides you with like an experience that shows you that this feels really true for you, right? So like I can't even count the number of people at the end of a coaching session that's just so impactful. They'll say like the most obvious cliche thing. They'll be like, I don't need to put so much pressure on myself. Like something like that. Like I'm like, I could have told you that at the beginning. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, but people have to experience the process of getting there on their own in order to for it to really, really resonate.
Yeah,
So everything that you said made sense. And I support everything you said. I think sometimes people try to take the advice you just gave or kind of that picture that you just created and start there.
yeah.
And when it doesn't really feel like it fits, it doesn't have nearly the impact.
100%, which is why the beginning of the process is learning how to connect to your felt
Yes.
sense and trust yourself and like let yourself have training wheels on for a little while. Like you're learning. Like a lot of times people are like, well, how do I know what this means? Well, try and see what happens.
Right. Right.
Like what's your gut feeling about this? And when you come into your body and you start connecting to your felt sense, there's all these ways that your brain's like, no, you're making it up. You can't listen to that. Don't do that. And yeah, so really it is a process of relearning how to honor the information your body's giving you and trust it and start to take action. And yes, 100%. If you just try to go to the end and make all the external changes, it's not going to work because not everything is what is right for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And again, not to say you can't do it that way, but it seems to have less of an impact, which is why I coach the way I do. And I can see why you coach the way that you do. It's not, I can always give people information or tell them to cognitively reframe things, but that's not quite getting them to the skill that I'd like them to have, I suppose.
Yes.
Okay. So before we go, one final question for you. So you are more in the menopause and female health area than I am. And I'd love to know what you noticed about the trends over the last couple of years in terms of acceptance of this kind of biopsychosocial model of menopause, PMS, hormonal transitions. Are we headed in the right direction or is it still really mechanistic and biological? Like, where are we at?
I mean, certainly there is awareness if you look out there, but if I'm talking about the women who are coming to me, they have awareness. There's more awareness of like mind body pain or TMS
Hmm. Hmm.
or that, but there's also a lot more knowledge about what's happening with hormones during menopause
Yeah,
and also lots more treatment options. And
that's
so
what I
that
worry about.
keep
Yeah.
them sucked into this medical approach
Yeah.
too long. And also I think people, with mind body pain, there is really like oh, well, if it's physical, then it can't be emotional and psychosocial. Like they're independent things. Like either
Right.
it's purely not physical and then I can heal it using a mind body approach, or there's a physiological component and so it's only that. And
Right.
that's not like it's all those things. Like
Right.
yeah.
You are not a bag of hormones, and you're also not just your mind. You're
Yes.
kind of everything. You're bigger than that. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
like we're mental, emotional, spiritual beings, and all of the parts of us affect what's happening in our body.
correct.
Yeah.
And this is what I worry about in the field of vestibular disorders too, Lorraine. And I'm so glad we're starting to talk about hormones because there is no question it's playing a role when we see so much of this stuff show up around hormonal transitions. The number of women who I've seen come through my community who are either postpartum or whose symptoms started postpartum or who are having symptoms as part of perimenopause. I mean, it's a very large number. I'm glad we're talking about the fact that these hormonal transition times are make someone, I think, again, more biologically vulnerable to these kind of symptoms. But again, I'm an optimist, but I see how people in the vestibular disorders world are talking about just plain old vestibular disorders that don't seem to be affected by hormones, and I'm worried that women are going to start getting this information. Oh yeah, these hormonal transitions really can affect you, and then they're going to be told that it's yet another thing wrong with them, and that is just exactly the opposite of what they need if they want to optimize recovery. So that's why we're doing this conversation,
Yes.
really. That's why we're having
Yes.
this conversation. Yeah.
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 So, I mean, I have this dream that you know women are and all of us are educated about the mental and emotional components of our health and how our nervous system impacts our health long before we have an illness that we can't figure out with our regular medical approach. Like that we just have this basic knowledge. And yeah.
Yes. Amen. This was such a great conversation. So much fun for me. I just loved every second of it. And I, again, cannot thank you enough. I really hope that everyone who watches this is going to enjoy it as much as I did, because this was just great. And I'm just hoping that it gets enough uh, visibility that people have the chance to at least see that there might be options other than just a biological approach for these kinds of things,
Mm,
while we fully acknowledge it's real. It is real. It is a real thing.
yeah,
So
me
thank
too.
you.
Thank you so much for having me. I was really fun talking with
This
you.
was,
Yeah.
yeah, this was. All right.
All
And
right.
all of you, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have questions or comments, please drop them below. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this as a podcast, head on over to my YouTube channel. I love hearing from you guys. And as always, if you could like, share, subscribe to my channel, or follow my podcast, all of these things help me reach more people and continue having conversations like this gem of a conversation that we just had. So thanks to all of you again. And thank you, Lorraine. We'll see you soon.